Hello everyone! I've added some boom boom to my boomer shooter. If you've watched my last two videos, you'll know that I've been working on a couple of side projects, taking a short break from Return to Sender. But I'm back, baby, and I've been really hard at work. A couple of devlogs ago, I mentioned that I replaced the sprint with a dash, which, when combined with a kick, launches enemies backwards. The problem with this was that it was a great way to get a face full of bullets. So in order to encourage its use, I've made it so the dash is now more of a slide, and if timed well, can have the player slide under enemy fire. It didn't take a whole lot to implement this, I just made it so the player's collision box shrinks while dashing, and goes back to its normal size when the sprint is over. I've been planning on adding graphics options to the game pretty much since I started development, but have had no clue how to do this in Godot, so I spent at least a day doing some research. In the end, it ended up being a combination of things. For the player's FOV, I just had to manipulate the active camera's FOV setting, which was easy enough. Adding this to the escape menu means you can change the setting anywhere, anytime, and see it update in real time, which looks freaking cool, and I wish more games would do this. I added the option to disable shadows to improve performance. Every light source handles its own shadows, so I added a script to every light source that checks the graphics manager and turns its own shadows on or off based on that. A funny thing, in the garden level, in order to improve performance, the flowers are not affected by lighting, so I just manually decreased the brightness for the flowers that are in the shade, so turning off the shadows kind of makes this obvious. Godot has a module called OS, which controls everything related to the operating system, including whether the window is running at full screen or not. So that's how I handle full screen windowed mode. Resolution options were a bit trickier. Godot, by default, will use your desktop resolution in full screen, and for most people that's going to be just fine. I've been using anchor points for the heads-up display, so everything should line up to more or less where it should be. However, the HUD is designed with a 16:9 ratio in mind, so anything outside of that might have some strange overlaps. So I added the option to resize the window to a selection of resolutions I know work well, and an option to either use your active desktop resolution in full screen or force one of these resolutions. I also made it so the HUD elements will shrink to half their size if a resolution smaller than 1080p is detected. This will ensure that the radars don't cover the entire screen at 720p, but you probably won't be playing the game 800 by 600 anytime soon. We interrupt this devlog to remind you to sacrifice your likes, comments, and subscribe to the algorithm gods. If you enjoy this channel and wish to see more, all hail the mighty algorithm. Now, back to your regularly scheduled devlog. I finally removed that ugly as sin main lobby screen with all the buttons and text boxes. For now it's just a grey screen that tells you to press escape or start to open the menu, but Mrs. Caesar is drawing up some menu art to go there. Instead, I've added all that functionality to the main menu, that being the pause menu, which also has the added benefit of making the game fully controller compatible, because you no longer need a mouse to click buttons. This really just involved adding all the new options to the main menu and coding a bunch of show-hide behaviors. So for example, you don't see the username and IP fields when setting up the single-player game or a multiplayer game over Steam. Also, I hide the level selection when appropriate, such as when selecting the tutorial, using matchmaking, or joining a direct IP game. As for the actual functionality, I just relocated all the code from the lobby screen to the main menu. There was an interesting bug that cropped up where switching from multiplayer to single player wasn't closing down the Steam lobby, but that has since been sorted. Now for that boom boom. So, I already had a first-person weapon model for the rocket launcher thanks to Ogre Zero. In fact, I already had everything I need to implement a rocket launcher thanks to the way I've been writing my scripts. I started out by making a player weapon that fired the baddie's projectile, and just making sure it lined up nicely with the weapon model. Once that was done, I copied the projectile and changed the sprite and particles to make it look more like a rocket. All I needed now was the explosion. I copied the Kalmagorgon's acid puddle, which has variables for how long the puddle is around for, what percentage of the projectile damage it does every tick, and how often these ticks are. So, without having to write any new code, I just set the lifespan to a very short 1.5 milliseconds and made it do 100% of projectile every millisecond, meaning it just has time for one burst of damage. Then, I just made it so the projectile also spawned some particles for the explosion visuals when it made contact with anything, and boom! Rocket launcher complete, no new code necessary. Okay, that is a bit of a lie. I did add some extra code to the acid puddle script, which I renamed to AoE zone. There's now a flag that, when ticked, compares the distance each target is to the center of the explosion and adjusts damage accordingly, so the further you are from the explosion, the less damage you receive. I'm still playtesting how much the rocket launcher should cost and how much damage it should do, so I expect to be tweaking some numbers around for a while, but functionally it's all there and works really well. I'm not sure I like the explosion visuals though, so I might have to work on them some more. Finally, I wanted the minimaps to display walls for a while, but did not want to draw a map manually for each level. I figured for a while that I'd be able to get the map information straight from the level grid map to display a map, but never really looked into how to do this. Well, until now. So, I used the getUsedCells function to get a list of every single cell with either a wall or floor in it, then filtered out everything that's too high or low by adding a variable that you can set to tell what level is the wall level. Anything below that will be considered floor, and anything higher will be considered ceiling or decorative. Then, the index using getCellItem and coordinates for all the leftover cells are placed in an array and sent to the minimap. The minimap then converts this list of cells into a 2D tileset by placing a tile with a matching index at the same coordinates, using the x and z coordinates converted to x and y. Running this at the start of a level draws a 2D minimap that matches all the walls in the level's 3D grid map. The next step was to move the map around on the minimap to show the player's exact position. Now, I'm not actually very good at math, trigonometry and the like, so it took me an embarrassingly long time to figure this out, and in the end I did compromise a little bit. Before this update, the monster icons would move smoothly so you could see exactly what angle they were approaching you at all times. In order to get the map to align properly, I used the level grid map's world2map function to convert the player's world position into a grid coordinate that could easily be converted to a spot on the 2D tile map, and I then offset the tile map's position accordingly, to make it look like it's displaying the player's position. This meant that the minimap now updates on a grid and moves one square at a time, no longer having any smooth movement. I modified the monster tokens to update in the same way to keep it consistent, and removed the shop icons which didn't align very nicely at all, and didn't seem quite as necessary now that you could see the walls on the map. I added the position of the background to the network package that gets sent to update your opponent's minimap, and now you can see their exact position in the map at all times. A nice little positive of having the map update on a grid rather than smoothly is that it's a little bit harder to tell that the remote map is updating a few times a second to save on bandwidth rather than every frame. I was very excited when I first added a remote minimap as it made the multiplayer feel a lot more tangible, seeing when the other player was surrounded by monsters. But now, being able to see their exact position in the map at all times has made it even better. So I am very excited about that. And that's about it. There have been some important bug fixes over the last few weeks, including the minimap no longer updating about halfway through a match, and some end-of-match crashes, but I don't want to bore you with the details. For the near future, I'll be focusing on polishing up everything I can, adding the menu art for example, and making it more obvious to the player when they host the game that they are waiting for someone to join. But otherwise, the list of things I need to add or fix before getting press and content creators to play the game is getting shorter and shorter, so I'm getting very close to inviting content creators to play the game. I may have already contacted one or two, but the real push will be soon. Unfortunately, after doing this full-time for a year, while I've been furloughed on my corporate job, I'm being called back to work next week, so development is going to slow down significantly. I will still be working on the game and this channel in evenings, but gone are the daily 8-hour game dev sessions. One day I'd love to quit my job and do this full-time, but with so many financial responsibilities it's not a risk I can take until I'm already making a living off of it, which means growing my audience significantly and really generating some hype for Return to Sender, and sadly I am nowhere near that. But a man can dream, I guess. As usual, thank you so much for watching. Please check out my itch page if you're interested in my smaller, more experimental games, or the results of my Game Jam entries, and Wishlist Return to Sender on Steam if you haven't already. With all that said, I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye!